Who?
The guy who goes by Hanson Phil. I don't know his real name.
Hanson Phil. Nope, never heard of him.
All right. Well, Phil gave us a bunch of love on Twitter the other day after he passed his Network Plus, so I just wanted to say thank you to Phil for that.
You know what, Jason, I think that was actually someone, that individual user. I couldn't find him. I looked him up for you, but I couldn't find him.
Oh, okay.
But you got someone to help someone to pass.
Yeah, well, the thing is, too, he had a reference in his Twitter handle to the song Mr. Blue Sky by ELO, so I said good reference, and then I realized I just aged myself when I told him good reference. So there you go. But, all right, well, anyway, so I had a nice conversation earlier this week with Thomas Hopper, and we went through this, what I'm about to show you here, although I changed it up just a little bit for all of you. What I'm showing you here is a possible test question on subnetting, which is, and this is something you might have to do in real life too, to where you go into a business and they've got a single Class C subnet. You know, they plunk a router down, maybe they put a server in or two, or three, and now they want to segment the network. So they want to basically just break this network up. So the possible test question is, if you've got some different departments needing some different devices, and I've simplified it here on the screen so we can just focus on the numbers. Two-part question here. The first part is the results of the 3 networks, and then the second part is how many addresses are left. Now, as far as the results, what we're really going for here is what will be the CIDR notation. So I'm going to put this in parentheses here because I purposely left a couple things out before talking to you all today. So what will be the CIDR notation? I'm just going to put some notes here of, hold on a second. I had the display there, all right. So we're saying the CIDR for 45 devices will be something. CIDR for 18 devices will be something. And then the CIDR for 55 devices will be something. And then the second part of the question is how many addresses are left over. So it's a tricky one. It's typically will show up, this is mostly for Network Plus, so it'll typically show up as a simulation type question because they'll have these things to where you have to go in and either use a drag and drop or use a drop down arrow method to identify what is needed, and then from there calculate how many addresses you have left. So a couple of different ways we can approach this, but the first thing we want to cover is if you're given a /24 network to start with, and I'm just going to start a little note taking over here on the right. If you're given a /24 network to start with, the first question I would have for you is, how many addresses do you have to start with? In other words, if you left it as a /24 network, how many addresses are on that network?
254.
254, you want to, yeah, and if you want to take 256 minus the 2 for the host and the broadcast, that's fine. Because technically you do have the 256 addresses available, but you are going to lose one for the host, one for the broadcast. So there's a little bit of a, interpretation there. But if you get a test question like this, always assume that the host and the broadcast addresses are implied. So we're starting with 256 addresses to start. So we want to keep that in mind. Okay. So then this is something that I've talked about quite a few times in these tutor sessions, but if you get a test question such as this, the first thing you want to do is find your either wax paper or paper they give you in the pen, because you're going to do some jotting down of numbers here. And really what this comes down to is identifying, pardon me?
Sorry.
Oh no. What it really comes down, oh yeah, well, I do that all the time, so that's okay. So really what this comes down to is figuring out your different CIDR notations and how many addresses are available on each, and then using that information to figure out which CIDR notation you're going to need for each of these 3 networks that you see here. So first things first, and somebody can help finish this sentence, but for each of the 3 networks here, is the slash number, which is now at /24, is it going to be higher or lower? And why would you say it's higher or lower? Is it going to be a slash higher than 24 or lower than 24, and what's your reasoning behind that? Because that's the first thing you got to know here.
It will be higher. Higher.
Okay, why? Why?
Because
I'm going to go
you're breaking up the network. When you break up the octets, the first ones, I forget the numbers.
okay.
But as you break up the octet, you're adding a 1 to it.
Okay,
I don't know
you're saying it's /25. Right? Oh, I'm with you. Okay, so if you start off, you're adding 1 to the octet, so now you've got 25 binary 1, so you're dealing with a /25 network. So then the question becomes, on the /25 network, how many addresses do you have available? And something we covered in previous sessions, and if you weren't here for those, that's fine, you'll learn it now. But there's a very easy way to figure this out.
126.
Yeah, you have 126 addresses if you don't have the host and the broadcast. Technically, you start off with 128. And I'm just going to put a little disclaimer here on this before losing the host. And the reason why I say 256 here is because if you're breaking this up into 3 networks, well, you're not assigning a host or a broadcast address right now, are you? You're going to assign a host and broadcast address to each of these 3 networks. That's why you start with the 256 addresses, because, you know, if you're taking one network and you're breaking it up into 3, you really are starting at the point where you have no network, because you're going to have to pull that network apart, not physically, but I'm talking from a logical address standpoint. You got to pull that network apart so you can get 3 networks out of it. So you technically have all 256 addresses at the moment. Now, you're going to lose a host and a broadcast for each of these 3 networks that you're splitting this up for, but we'll worry about that a little later. The point, and this is what makes it easier, is, and I've said this before, when you up the slash number, you cut the number of addresses in half. When you lower the slash number by 1, you double the number of addresses you have. That's how this all works out. So, technically, we could take, oh, well, here's a little question for you, all right? Because I'm just going to draw this out a little bit so we get the logic down behind this. So if we go by this moniker to where we're in a /25, you have 128 addresses available. Why would we not want to assign a /25 to any of these 3 networks we see? Because we can. Well, why wouldn't we?
Use too many addresses for just one network.
Absolutely. Okay. So now you're in a situation where, you know, let's say you go, well, I'm just going to make all 3 of these a /25. Well, if you had 256 addresses to start with and you're trying to create some kind of supernet, you're going to get stuck because you have, you know, 128 times 3 is 384. You don't have 3. That's the number one thing. Secondly, and more importantly, when you're doing a test question on this, they're going for a tight fit. So whatever the number is for devices that you see on the question right now, that's what you go with. You know, this isn't a real life situation where you're planning for growth, is what I'm trying to say. So it's got to start. And you might be wondering in your life, well, why not make all 3 of these /24s and be done with it? Well, you might have a router that's already configured as a /24 and you don't want to mess that up. That's one thing. Secondly, if you're ever wondering why not have just more addresses available, well, it's a matter of segmentation, and sometimes network administrators are trying to keep their sizes down. Because the more addresses you have to give out, the more likely it is someone's going to hack into that network because they're going to take one of your open addresses. So there is some rationale behind lowering this. And there's all kinds of other theory if you get past network plus on this, like if you ever go and study Cisco or whatever, there's a lot of /30 networks out there so that there's only 2 addresses available for like a couple of routers to talk to each other or a couple of switches to talk to each other and stuff like that. So Though you don't have to know that much for the Network Plus test, there is some real-life rationale behind having these smaller segmented networks. So that said, all right, so we're deciding we don't want to do a /25 on these. That's fair enough. Okay, so if we go with a /26, then how many addresses do you have available to start with?
64.
You got 64 because we're cutting in half. Exactly. Now we might be able to assign these to some of these. Right. 62 available. Exactly. That's one. See, if we're being technical about this, the 64 becomes 62 once you actually assign that block. Because think about it, if you haven't assigned these to a network anywhere, these 64 addresses, then you don't have the host and the broadcast to worry about. Again, I'm just being technical here. But you want to make sure that when you're cutting in half, you get the right number to start with. That's why I'm always separating the number of addresses that we have from the host and the broadcast, and that's why I'm doing it. Okay, so this is possible that you can assign these to the network. Now, you do have one with 18 devices, so let's just carry this one more time. Okay, so if you, what's that number that I've got where the cursor's blinking?
32.
32.
Sure. And then you always want to make sure you go one step further just in case, just so you don't miss anything here. So what's that last number that we have? If I go with /28, how many addresses
16. 16
okay,
and
perfect.
14 usable.
That's right. Okay, so looking at what we see here, do we have all the CAIDR notations we need to answer this question?
Yeah.
We do. Okay. All right, so tell me something. Which slash are we assigning here?
For the first one?
Yeah. It's a slash what?
26.
26. Okay, and then that means that we're assigning it a block of 64 addresses. And we are going to lose the 2 for the host and the broadcast, but you're allocating 64 addresses to that block. By the way, I have to warn you all, if you see some random typing on the keyboard here in a second, it's because my little boy cat is very, very close to the keyboard and he has a tendency to jump on it. So don't worry, my fingers aren't going crazy. It's just his paws hitting it, if you see that. I'm trying to keep him away, but you know how that goes. All right. So, so we got 64 addresses minus 2. All right, so we're good there. We're good there. Now we go with this 18 devices. Now which slash are we assigning to that one?
/27.
Yeah, we're putting the 27 in there. Perfect. Okay, so 32 addresses minus 2. All righty. And then what are we assigning here?
26 again.
/26.
Another 26. All righty. I'm with you. Yeah, another 26. So 64 addresses minus 2. Okay, so you've got your 3 networks covered now. Then the question becomes how many addresses are left? Now, let me share with you a mistake that people tend to make. This is what they're going to do. They're going to say, well, okay, if I have a 256 to start with, let me subtract the number of devices that I've got. And that's the number of addresses I have left. And that answer that you see on there is absolutely wrong. Okay? When you assign a block of addresses, and for any network at any time, you're assigning the entire block. So the correct way to look at this is 256 minus what? Tell me.
160 total.
160 total, exactly. So it's minus 64, minus 32, minus 64. You got 96 addresses left. Now, how you split that up, if you need to split that up, well, that's decided. Here's my other point on this, ladies and gents. If you get a test question like this, where there's 3 or 4 things to figure out, don't fret over that. Figure out one thing at a time. You know, I've seen test questions, the simulation test questions on these CompTIA tests to where, you know, they're saying stuff like, you know, I got 5 or 6 different things to do. Well, you know, for a sense, you're going to be like, oh, bleep, I've got 90 minutes for this test. I'm going to take 10 minutes on this question alone. Maybe, maybe not. But instead of thinking that way, just think, okay, I'm just going to do it like I do in real life. I'm going to knock off one issue at a time. Then I'll submit the answer and move on to the next. So my point is, if you get a test question like this, always, and this is with any subnetting deal such as this, always start with your starting point. So whether this is going to start at 256 and then let's say you're going to do a /23 and double the addresses because you need to fill a larger network or something like this. Always have a, that's why I tell people in class, because I've done with subnetting, you don't worry about memorizing all the slash notations and how many numbers you have. Just memorize one. Like for me, it's always a /24 with 256 addresses. I got that. You just easily go up and down from there. And then fit the pieces where you need them, like this. And I get a lot of these books, and everybody else saying, "Well, you got to memorize 2 to this power, 2 to that power." No, you don't. You got to know 1, and then what to do with it. So, kind of like driving on the road. You don't memorize every mile marker. You get 1 or 2 landmarks, and then you base everything off that. So, bad analogy, but I just came up with it. Because Grace and I had a nice conversation earlier, and we were talking about, metropolitan areas versus, well, areas that aren't, and driving and all that. So, what was in mind. But that's my one prepared example for the day. I think, Thomas, again, thank you for I think Thomas is on this call. Let me see. Well, either way, Thomas, I want to thank Thomas for bringing that one up because it's a good tutor exercise for stuff like this. So, okay, so that's my one example to get going. What questions do you all have today on any of this? Oh, I'm sorry, before I do that, I got to show you this. How many of you have been to the website on the veteran site that has the labs?
I went over some of them last week, Jason, so they've seen them.
Oh, okay, good. Because we just added, what you just saw here, we added a lab for that. Pretty much the same situation. If you go to veterans.learnkey.com and in the Student Resources Center, we added a lab for breaking up a subnet. So we just added that in. It's pretty similar to what I just showed you, but if you want to get a little bit more practice on that, there's a new lab we just added. So I would commend that to you. And over the next 2-3 weeks, I'm going to be adding some more A+ labs, maybe 1 or 2 more Network+ labs. I did put a post in the forum. If any of you have a request for a lab, feel free to post it there. That doesn't guarantee I'm going to do it right away, but it's good to know if you do run into something, you're like, hey, you know what, could you put a lab up there that better explains that? So I just wanted to make sure you all knew about that. With that, all right, questions, anybody? Lay them on me.
Well, don't you have to sit there and put in the sequence of them too?
What?
The sequence of the networks.
It depends on
you have to go with the largest network first, and then the second largest, and then the third largest, and so on.
It depends on the test question. Sometimes they'll have you be that specific, sometimes not. So I would just say if you get a situation like that, read through the test question and see exactly where they're going with this. Sometimes they're going to put diagrams up just with every area, and it's up to you to either do a drag and drop or use a drop-down arrow to get the right mask in there, or not the right mask, but the right CIDR notation. So my answer to that is it really depends on what question, what the question looks like on the test. Now, in real life, you do want to go with the largest network first, yes. But for the test question, it really all depends on what the question is asking. In other words, and that brings up a good point. Here's something worth remembering for any certification test. They're only going to go like so far with a real life situation, because what they're not going to do is give you a question that's going to take you 20 minutes to answer. I mean, if it does, it does, but that's not the intention. So that's why when we, and just to change gears for just a moment, when we did the recording for the A+ course, even though there are some test topics on things like, you know, changing out a socket or things like that, we didn't do extensive video on that because the test isn't going to ask you to do that. They may ask you where it goes, or they might ask you to like take the parts and drag an order of which, you know, what you would add first, and then, you know, putting the the thermal paste on, and then putting the socket in, and then the heat sink back on, and all that stuff. But yeah, when they give you a test question like it, they're not going to give you one that's going to take you 30 minutes to answer. So my long-winded answer for your question is pay attention to what the question is asking and then play along with it. Yeah, because like I got a test. Look, when I took the A+ part, I don't remember if it was part 1 or part 2 really, but when I took the most recent A+ test, I got a simulation question on securing a wireless network. Now, if you think about that one for a minute, I mean, you could have like 50 things that you could do to secure a wireless network. But the question had very much specifics on what they wanted people to be able to do and not do, and so that's how you play it. Now, I don't remember what the details of the question were, and even if I did, legally I'm not supposed to say so anyway, but I got a question along those lines, I'll just say that. So.
Yeah, I got the same one last week, or whatever, when I took the A+ part 1. And almost the same question, like they give you a mock router GUI.
Yep.
And you just kind of play with it from there.
Yep, that's the one I had. In fact, it was on 901 when I took it. Now that you mention it, and so let me give you a couple of clues on that while we're on the subject. So you got to look at this is why I always say study the test objectives closely, because you got to look and see what they're actually going for. You know, for securing a wireless router, whether it's A+ or Network Plus. I mean, what are some things that CompTIA says you can do? Disable the SSID. That's one, right? And then another one would be doing a MAC address list. And, you know, there's a few others, you know, making sure you have a passphrase. So you have to figure on a test question like that, you're almost always going to get the passphrase one. So figure that's going to be something you're going to do. But if you don't get that, if they don't give you the passphrase on the question, then don't worry about using that in the answer. If they tell you others should be able to connect to the network without having a like, all right, I don't remember the exact wording here, but I do recall something about how, you know, this is a college campus or something, and users should be able to connect to the network without having to call tech support for the name. Well, then you don't disable the SSID. See where I'm going here? So when you get a section on, like, wireless routers, this is why when you're setting for the test, you want to know what the specific bullet points are underneath that wireless router objectives, because there's a very good chance they're going to word those questions that way. So, yeah, like if they tell you that, look, if they tell you that only this machine, and this machine should be allowed on the network, well, then you're doing a MAC address list. If they tell you people should not be able to connect unless they call tech support, you're disabling the SSID. If they tell you that they should be able to connect to the network without calling tech support, you don't disable the SSID. See where I'm going here? So you just step back if you get a question like that and you figure, okay, what is it that how would I do this in real life? And then you'll do just fine on the question. So.
Another thing I had a hard time with is like if you're doing basic help desk stuff before you take the test and you learn like certain like workarounds, or you know exactly what the issue is.
Sure.
You have to like remember to slow down and remember what CompTIA is actually looking for.
Yep. There you go. Troubleshooting right there.
Yeah, because that like it took me a little bit to like remember like, oh yeah, I can't remember a specific example, but I definitely had to like reread it to make sure I was trying to give the answer they were looking for, not the one that I knew to do to fix the problem.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you both. I'm going to give you all some blanket advice on troubleshooting questions, because you know that's 30% of the exam almost, both exams. So if you get this down, you'll have about 30% of the exam that you don't have to worry about, because you'll be absolutely correct on those. First thing is when you get a troubleshooting question, there's basically two things you want to ask yourself. What step in this troubleshooting process are they going after? Because always, look, when you get a troubleshooting question, it's almost always geared on a step. So basically, you got to figure out, all right, which one is that they're dealing with here, number one. Number two, you always want to approach them from the standpoint of a fairly new technician and what the new technician would do. Like over time, we learn all the fixes for our environments, to your point. So you got to look at it through the eyes of, and that, by the way, and I'm not saying this is a good, bad, or indifferent thing, but see, that's why when we did the A+ course, we did it from the standpoint of a new hire at a tech company. Because that's the approach you want to be taking on the test. So it's like, what would be, and I said this in a previous session, but it definitely bears repeating here. You know, sometimes you just look at the answers and go, all right, what's the easiest thing to do to try to start? And that's really the answer. If it sounds like a common sense thing, that's probably the answer. If it sounds ridiculous, it probably is. That's the way you approach that. So you look at each of the situations on the answers, and then that's how you pick your best one. Because what's CompTIA geared for? People trying to get into the business. So they're going to be asking questions that way. So that's the approach you want to take. And then you don't have to think too much, which is always nice. A lot of good general theory questions today so far. This is a good thing. All right, what else do y'all have? By the way, in case you missed it, the 902 course for A+ is fully out, including the workbook. So I don't know how many of you have that one in your plans, but the entire course is out. The workbook's out. The workbook's huge. It's got 260 pages or so in it, and I would recommend you go through it because it'll only make you sharper.
I'm actually like in that course right now.
Which one, 901 or 902?
902.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We saved the funniest part for last in 902. I won't ruin it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's 260 pages of the workbook.
250 something, yeah.
260.
It started 260, yeah. It started around 300, and I handed it off to the editors, and they got it down to about 260. So that's good.
Oh, that makes life easier for me. Thanks.
No problem. Don't thank me for that one. I just gave them the script, and when I'm done writing the draft, I wrote the draft for it, and so when I'm done writing the draft, the writing team actually makes it look better, and where they can shrink a couple things here and there, they do. So, you know, they do the making it look good work, and they do a really good job of it. So.
Cool.
I'm getting better at this. I'm getting better at that. I mean, like, gosh, the Network Plus, they must have cut 100 pages off of that one. But this one, it was only 40. So, yeah.
I'm going through the A+ for a requirement for the contract job that I just signed for, but they also require me for Security Plus. How's that course?
Security Plus?
Yeah,
How does that once you pass A+?
Say again?
Security Plus is, well, number one, once you pass A+, Security Plus won't seem as bad. But
okay.
I'll tell you where Security Plus is different, and this is for anybody who's interested. Security Plus is a lot more theory and not quite as hands-on.
Okay.
So that particular course, you're going to be playing the memorization game a little bit more. In fact, quite a bit more. In other words, they're not going to have you go on to something and configure an encryption using, you know, RSA or whatever, but you need to know what it is. Like you're going to get test questions where you see a situation where it's like such and such needs this, what's the best encryption key? And I'm going to tell you right now, that's not easy stuff to memorize because, frankly, it's rather boring unless you're a total security encryption geek. And if you are, more power to you.
Yeah.
But.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
All right. I just got my 801, 802 A+ cert. I'm just curious, what's the difference between those two and the 901 series now?
Some of the things I noticed, because I just took the 901 and I'm in 902 now, when I was actually going to community college for 801 and 802, the differences I noticed was like technology. Like 901 has a little bit more Mac stuff in it. Apple cables and the lightning cables. Stuff on Thunderbolt.
I'm back, by the way.
Okay. But there's a lot more Mac stuff in 901, and trying to think, smartphone questions. Difference between iPhone, Android, or OS X or whatever, and then
Yes. Can everyone hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jason.
That's good. I got bumped off. I don't know what happened. See, that's what happens. I started talking about encryption and somebody got suspicious and cut me off.
Yeah.
Oh, my screen's back on. Okay, good. All right. So, Security Plus. Yeah, it's a lot more. It's a lot more rote. It's a lot more memorization than A+. Yes, there's going to be certain server things you want to study as far as how to do a VPN, how to run IPsec, but definitely it's much more memorization than A+. Now, somebody was just talking about, you know, the differences on 800 versus 900, and I just didn't say anything because you got all those differences nailed.
cool. I wasn't talking out of my ass then. Thanks.
We would have heard something different if you were. But yeah,
You're a funny
you're
guy.
right. He teed it up. I just sort of like hit the ball. That's all. But you know, thing about 90. Okay, so those of you who are like, maybe you're like, oh, geez, I don't work with Macs too much. I don't work with Linux too much. If you go through the objectives line by line and are familiar with those concepts and what they mean, you'll do fine. So if you know when a lightning connector is used, by the way, it's just a new connector they have for chargers and stuff and a few other things. But if you know that, you're fine. In fact, on that subject, to bring something up here, I want to show you a little trick. And this is not something you want to rely on too much, okay? I'm showing you here, but I think this will help you as far as objectives. So you're talking about Macs and stuff. So let me get over to 902. Okay, here we go. Oh, see, this is perfect right here. Let's get out of here. All right. When it says here, given a scenario, apply something, given a scenario, use, given a scenario, do this, those are the objectives where you want to, if you can, get some hands-on practice. Anytime you see the words given a scenario and used, those are all possible simulation questions. Now understand that you're not going to have 80 simulation questions. I'm just telling you those are all possible simulation questions. Now on the other hand, when you see something like this that says identify, the chances you're going to get a simulation question there are pretty small. I'm not saying it's no chance. I'm saying it's far less of a chance. So when you see objectives start with the words identify or define, the chances of you're getting a simulation question on those is smaller. The chances of you getting a multiple choice question on that is high. So you definitely want to know your terms and definitions on those. Like for example, in the 902 course, and you know, if I'm giving away suspense, well, oh well. But in the 902 course, we cover And we show you on the screen most of what you see as far as these Mac tools. I'll tell you something here. In an effort to stay on top of things, I do scope out the competition and what they do in books and what they do in video. Nobody else even shows a Mac that I've seen. We do. But my point is, we do it just to make sure we got stuff covered. Whereas, you know, you're probably not going to get a simulation question asking you to set up someone's keychain. But you could very well get a test question that says, what's the Mac app that's used to store passwords? The keychain. See where I'm going? So where it says, given a scenario, set up and use client-side virtualization. You might get an emulator. It might not even be VMware or Hyper-V. It just might be some generic-looking whatever, and you've got to be able to take and assign like memory to a virtual machine. You know, things like that. So, by the way, sorry if I kind of cut into that conversation a little bit, but I didn't know what was going on. I got cut off. So, but what you were saying about the objectives, whoever said that, that's absolutely correct. Everything you said that I heard was correct. Like here's another one right here. It says identify basic cloud concepts. You're not going to be asked on the test to set up software as a service, but you want to know what it is. You're not going to be asked to set up platform as a service. First of all, that takes like way too long for a test question, but you're going to want to know what it is. Like what are examples of platform as a service? What are examples of software as a service? Office 365, you know, that kind of stuff. You're going to want to know what rapid elasticity is. In real life, it's go to Azure and provision a new server without, you know, having to run an installation. It's that kind of stuff. So, what else do we have here?
It's a little, I guess, off topic, but as I'm going through the 902 and the actual interface you guys use for teaching and stuff, who do I make the suggestion to as far as like a couple additions that would help? Because I've called tech support asking about like closed captioning and it doesn't exist. Or like when I'm going through the training videos and a new one starts, the scroll bar for video selection goes all the way back to the beginning, so you kind of lose track of the title you're on.
Yes, I hate that. Okay. To your first of all, I'm going to pass along both of those for you because I got the ear of those guys. So consider, no, no problem, man. You know, consider your request made. Okay, number one. Number two, I can tell you that eventually we'll get a better player in there. I mean, they've made improvements on the one that's there now, but it could use some improvement. We'll give you that one. The other thing is, as far as the closed caption, I'm pretty sure that has been an option on some courses, but to make that a reality, the entire course has to be transcribed, and I know that they've got a little backlog on that. So as far as if and when that's going to be available, I couldn't tell you for sure. But I do know that is something that they do. They do transcribe all these courses. You might, and this is not even an excuse, but you can imagine with A+ being as long as it is, that one's going to take them some time to do because the transcribing department is one person. So. Yeah, but I will definitely give your feedback to those that control that stuff. And on that note, I don't know if any of you know this, but if you're using a mobile device, if you get the Puffin web browser, you can run these courses like nothing, like no problem at all. Because the Puffin web browser plays Flash, and they do it in a virtual environment, so it's actually pretty quick. Like I've had, this is just my own experience, at times I've had better success viewing these courses in a Puffin browser than I do on a desktop. The only thing the Puffin browser does is it does kind of drain the battery a little bit faster than the other browsers do. But if you're using an Apple device, if you're using an Android device, I would highly recommend you're going with the Puffin browser. The only thing that's a negative on it is that when you're viewing other websites, it does view it at full size because it's not going to pay any attention to the fact that it's a mobile site. Well, actually, I shouldn't say for sure, but it pays less attention. But you can view these courses on an iPad, an Android, tablet, whatever, easily with a Puffin browser. So that's just something you may want to look into. If you like to use a tablet, view one of our courses while you're on a beach somewhere. Actually, if you're on a beach somewhere, you shouldn't be viewing anybody's course, but that's a different subject. So, but yeah, no, I will definitely pass that along for you. So, consider your requests made.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's about 2 minutes left. Any last minute questions for Mr. Manibog?
Or Mr. Roberts?
I guess how much Server 2012 R2 is taught in your guys' programs?
Well, we got 3 courses on it.
Okay.
Yep. They all line up for the 3 exams to become an MCSA. So it's they map up to the 410, 411, and 412 exams. So 3.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And if I look a little tired, no, it's because we recorded all those on one trip I had out before they hired me full time. So.
Okay.
Just thought I'd give you that warning up front.
Alrighty, well, I guess that's about it. I want to thank Jason for coming and teaching us a little something again. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it a lot.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. I was telling the CEO the other day how much fun I have doing these. No joke. It's a pleasure of mine to be able to talk to you all once in a while. So it keeps me on my toes too. So that's a good thing. And I'm not sure when I'm coming back yet, but it'll be hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, I'll coordinate with Jason, and then I'll let everyone know when he lets me know, and we'll go from there.
Yep.
Alrighty.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy your night and weekend, and thank you very much for your time, everybody.